Good day, chess world. There's a saying amongst masters. It's from Tartakower. All rook endings are drawn except those that are not. And that's today's theme. We're going to be focusing on the classic, why is a rook and pawn endgame so difficult to win? What is the challenge in this? This is a repeat of something that we've seen earlier before, because it's Capablanca demonstrating how to win with 4 pawns versus 3 on one side of the board. Now, we've seen it earlier in the series. For those of you who are already signed up with the notes, you can join now if you want. Sign up below in the description. But those can refer back. Otherwise, you can watch the previous video that we've covered on this theme, where earlier in the series, Capablanca was on the black side and had 4 versus 3 and was able to convert it. Now, if we just understand from this graph I've got here, I like to use this, put this out in the notes so that you can understand it. Converting rook endings are particularly difficult because of the concept about activity, which is so very important. We can see how drawish they are. Now let's talk about our endgame that we want in this case and how we're looking to play it and handle it. So here we have an interesting question. If 4 against 3 is a theoretical draw, why did Capablanca win it anyway? And as I said, we've had it before. We've covered this earlier in the series, episode 15, if you go back to the game against Duras, where Duras is on the white side. Here, I want you to understand it's about pressure. Capablanca is the one that can apply pressure. For those that have gone through the notes, the series, the videos, you will know what Black's best defense and Black's defensive setup is. And this is actually a very valuable endgame to know because it helps us to think strategically about approaching a position and what we need to do. So first I'm going to arm you with, so you can catch up and understand these kind of endgames. What are some of the paths we should be looking at? Let's first understand putting together the plans for the defending side and the attacking side. So let's first start. As I said, we've got the defender. Number one, the defender should be keeping their king close to the pawns. This is not a case where the king needs to go running up onto the other side of the board and seeking activity, creating compensation. That is not going to bring success here. The second option that we must understand is that the rook needs to stay as far away from the white king as possible in this case. You want to check the maximum distance that's there. Now, it's very important to keep your pawns compact. The victory in episode 15 that Capablanca was able to create was because he was able to split up all the pawns and create a correct amount of distance in this one. So the defender, as weird as it is, should refuse to trade unless it brings the position more compact. And then, of course, crucially, we'll see in this game, the defending side should block every entry square for the king. It's really not, shall we say, that simple, but important that the defending side has got to build a wall to establish that defense. And then, of course, they should trade down to a drawn ending where there's nothing. A king and pawn where it's drawn, or one pawn on the board with a rook and it's a draw. So those little techniques are the important trades that the defending side should focus on. We're also going to be talking about the defending side's best structure. Now, number one, we need the king to invade. If you are the attacking side, you need the king to invade. You, of course, need the rook to play a very dominating role. You need to be playing active role. And then you want to split up the opponent's pawns. That's going to be a story that we're going to see again and again, where you want to isolate pawns so you can target it. And finally, the big win from this game, and that we're going to see, well, you can go back and check in episode 15, was the creation of the pass pawn and escorting it through. That is the path. Is plan number 2 in the endgame. Use your pass pawn. We're going to have to create one and get it done in this scenario. And finally, we need to typically convert into a famous Lucina position, looking to convert and win these ones in this case. So let's talk about how this gets approached, because we have such a fascinating situation. Normally, I give you two plans. The 2 plans are based on every single endgame, which is very simple. Plan number 1, attack your opponent's weak pawns. Plan number 2, use your pass pawns. Well, this doesn't apply here. And this is what Capablanca shows us. There's no two plans. What weak pawn? What pawn are we going to go at? The only weak pawn is f7. We certainly cannot get to that. So we'd have to magically teleport our king all the way to e8 with a rook over here, and black's not going to let that happen. So then we talk about use your pass pawns. Well, we're barely in a position to create a pass pawn, and certainly to escort it through is not the right plan at this stage. So we're going to see how Capablanca now starts to, and this, by the way, fundamentally is why this is a drawn ending, is because there are no ways to go forward. But if you're playing as white, of course you don't agree a draw. Why? You can't lose. You have 2 results. You draw or you win. So we keep on playing in this case, which is so very important to us, and we keep looking to use that. So let's first talk about Capablanca's planning and understanding. The defender should have their ideal structure. For those that still remember, the pawn should be on h5 by black. They should hold the structure in this way. Why? Because that way they have one weakness to worry about, and this pawn on h5 is ready to trade down. As we'll see, unfortunately, Mr. Yates is not completely aware of how to handle this position at all. So he doesn't quite get that he needs that pawn on h5, and this is the ideal setup in a rook and pawn ending. If you're defending these structures, why? Because your king can come up to f6, and remember that wall we're building? Look at how we would control with the pawns and the king, entry for the white king. Very important. So Capablanca first starts with understanding, look, he can't stop pawn to h5, so what he's going to do is he's going to cut off the king, because that's the thinking. Very valuable for you to have in your games. Number 1, what does my opponent want to do? Can I take it away from them? Even if it's a small victory, that's a big deal. That's a big positive for you to think about in these cases. So, okay, Yates plays rook to b4, doing the same sort of policy. Now Capablanca realizes, well, hold on, I'm not sure my opponent understands what he should do. So let me test him, and he plays a clever move, h3. Why? Think about this moment. Why? Why is Capablanca playing h3? And this is a clever move. Moving one pawn forward is a clever move. Well, in the simplest of terms, it's about understanding the best setup of the opponent. So we know that the best setup for the opponent, in this case, is to play h5. So here, if we take that h5 move away from the opponent, we're going to be doing well. So this is his idea. He's preparing g4. So black should be playing h5. Now, none of these decisions are lost, but as we'll see, he's making his life a little bit more challenging. So rook c4, king f3. Again, Capablanca says, well, hold on. I'm not going to rush with h5. We get rook to b4, rook to a5. I would say here Capablanca should already push to g4. But why that is because if h5, this is probably still the best plan. Now we can push past with a nice advantage in this case. Instead of capturing, we would want to keep pawns on. Again, is this a one endgame? Certainly not, but we can apply pressure. So Capablanca shows a little bit of patience. He says that he really wants to prevent h5. And now at this point, h5 should be played by black, but he makes his life much harder. g4. Now, the reason why this is making it more of a challenge is, remember what I said in the beginning when I gave you that little template of the defending side, the offensive side. Black's job is to try and create a barrier, a wall, stopping this king from getting in. They're not doing the greatest of jobs right now. So he plays h6, certainly fine. King g3, and now the point is he wants to get all pawns next to each other. So the rook goes to c1, and now king g2, not a complete necessity. Rook c4, rook d5. And this is something, whenever you go through Capablanca's games, he does not rush with decisions. He has the better of the game, and he wants to poke, prod, because Capablanca is fully aware that this is not a completely one endgame. So he keeps wanting to confront the opponent with problems, and that's valuable for you. This is a long endgame. There is no need for white to rush. You should rather give every opportunity to your opponent to mess up. And if you try and rush your moves, you potentially are going to force them into finding the draws that are there. So Capablanca shows the patience. Now he plays f4. Okay, and now we see rook check, king g3, rook e2. Capablanca plays rook e5. Why? Because if we go king f3, we'd like to play it, the rook goes here. And then rinse and repeat. So I suspect that's what Capablanca should have done anyway, and then played rook e5, because we have the wonderful teaching from the Russian school of chess, which is if you can repeat, you must repeat. And the reason for that is that we'd like to gain some time on the clock. But back then, there wasn't bonus time. So rook to e1. And now what are we doing to grow our position? We do want to advance the pawns. We can already imagine a future where we're getting these advances to happen for us. But we still need to manufacture weaknesses. So here he plays king to f2, rook to h1, king to g2. The rook goes across the board. Now, as I've just said to you, we're wanting to push up on this side of the board, but our first goal is to try and split up the opponent's pawns. How would we do that? And what I mean by the splitting up of pawns, if we could get this g-pawn out of the way, we're very happy, because then our king would have access into the position, potentially getting into the side of the board. And that is precisely the plan from Capablanca here. He plays h4. Very, very clever. Very simple in this situation. So after h4, we have now this wonderful move of king to f6. We play h5, and now you can understand why black should have played h5 themselves earlier, because suddenly there is an interesting problem. When this pawn gets to capture here, if pawn takes back, we have a protected pass pawn. If king takes back, now they have two isolated pawns. So I want you to see how Capablanca is beginning to manufacture the things that we need. Plan number one, attack your opponent's weak pawns. When we started, there was one weak pawn. Take careful note there. There's now two of them, h6 and f7. They're not easy to attack, but we've got time on our side. So here we get this move rook check, king up to f3, rook to e1, struggling already for some plans. So Capablanca now moves his rook far away, because he's now made an opportunity for the king to join in. And at the same time, he's building his position. So king g7, and here is the problem. Pawn takes g6, and we see our first issue. There's only one move for black. Let's unpack. Why not pawn takes g6? Now this is very important. We see this theme here. Pawns are together. He's potentially making an outside pass pawn. This is awesome. Remember rook and pawn endgames. All rook and pawn endgames are drawn, except those that are not. And it seems crazy. It seems weird. Why would we take this viewpoint? What is this hocus pocus nonsense? All rook and pawn endgames are drawn, except those that are not. When you look at a rook and pawn endgame, you first automatically assume it is a draw. And then you start looking why it might not be. Why? Because it's all built on activity of pieces. And this is a perfect example. Here, our rook gets active. Remember in those principles we looked at earlier, get your rook active, get your rook causing trouble of the enemy king. And now we see precisely the problem, because now the king would have to go up to f6, we would deliver check, driving the king backwards, and suddenly we've got a great deal of benefits. What are we looking to do as our plan? f5. Now we have two connected pass pawns rushing at the enemy king. This is precisely what we wanted. The enemy king is cut off. Our king will join in with the pawns. We are going to march into the position, and this is a mess. This is a bad, bad mess for the opponent. Pawn takes, then we simply have pawn takes, and they are in massive trouble. Our king, they cannot prevent this, will get up here onto e5. We will drive them backwards, and they are going to be crushed. Suddenly, from nowhere, the opposing king has been turned into a target, and this pawn is weak and stuck. So I want you to see how sensitive this position is. And again, it leaves us going, if only Yates had played pawn to h5 earlier. So, okay, wonderful. They take with the king. Yates realizes his king is in trouble. What are we to do here? How do we continue? We know this endgame is drawn, Yes, but how can we continue as a theme? What sort of ideas do we have here? Now, first and foremost, we can see a bit of a plan. We would love to make a pass pawn by pushing forward and get this pass pawn, but that's not the only thing we do. We need to keep the enemy king suppressed. Very, very important. So we get running forward here, e4. And this is very important at this stage, where we are looking to deliver with this sort of check. Push the opponent out of the way. So the opponent wants to be difficult, check. Whoa. How do we solve this problem? Because we can't move now towards the rook. We're also seeing a wonderful defensive theme, which is great for you to remember with black when you're defending these rook endgames. Put your rook on the other side of the board. Black is doing a great job with this. Yates is doing really well with this because the rook now can harass white's king. So how do we solve this problem? Because if we go down immediately, we're going to lose this pawn. So let's talk. How do we solve this problem here? What are we trying to do? And this is very instructive. Here, Capablanca runs to g3. Why? Because now rook check. He can then run across to h3. Very clever. If there's another check, we have a nice little opportunity. Why? Because our king will go to g2, and then we chase the rook away, and we continue to build. Instead, we get this move rook f1. How do we play? Because if we go king g3, he's going to repeat. Should we push f5 check? Or should we play rook across? Don't push pawns just yet. Pushing f5 would be a very poor move because suddenly their king gets active and our winning chances have completely evaporated. Why? They're threatening check and winning this pawn. They're going to continue to harass us with rook check, so we must play rook to f5. Now, the nice part of this move is the pressure we're generating onto this pawn is valuable. And here we start seeing the cracks emerging because he plays rook to e1, and this seems almost like it's nothing. Here he needs to actually prevent pawn to e5. And it's so very instructive that here in this position, I think the best way for him to play was actually f6, taking the energy out of this e5 move. And I believe then he would be holding this position. Why? Because watch this space. Now, after rook e1, e5, it's a very different contest. And suddenly, Capablanca has a win. But why? Why would he be winning? It's all about this square that the rook can now sit, targeting multiple pawns. Also, the big feature for us to take note of is we can drive the black king backwards. When we had this position earlier, had he pushed f6, there's no improvement. There's too many weak pawns, hanging pawns that are sitting here in this case. So this crucial moment, but it's a difficult one to see. So we can spare him some of the criticism, understanding this kind of mistake. So pawn to e5, okay, wonderful. I've just said to you it's winning. Rook check. How do we win in this position? Where should we move our king? And this is so very important. So often we immediately think, and this is the challenge with rook endings, we immediately think, get active, which in principle is the right theme, but you have to be careful. Here, two moves win, one move throws it away and leads to a draw. And as weird as it is, king h4 is incorrect. So king to h4, the reason why it's incorrect is because now rook here, rook check, this looks like it's winning, and then king h5, we're going to win the pawn over here. Oops, we will be snapmated. So we cannot play king to h5. And that inherently is the problem. Notice how this rook does a brilliant job of boxing in white's king, so white's king cannot get back across. Remember black? Black would like to liquidate pawns, so if g5, the only way to continue forward, captures. This is precisely what black wants. Why? Because now the whole fight revolves around just this pawn and this little collection of squares over here. That is it. Black will be able to hold. There's still some pressure white will be able to generate, but black will hold. So instead, we go king back to g2, which seems so weird because now this is a big problem. Let's think about it. Our king's cut off. King cut off. If our king can't join in, how could we possibly win? And this is such an instructive moment from Capablanca. Because first and foremost, we have a problem to solve here, which is the opponent's king. Let's drive them backwards. We're going to play rook check, king to g7. And now we're back onto our usual planning. Plan number 1, attack the opponent's weak pawns. They've got 2 of them. So which one are we going to go after at this stage? Yes, that pawn on f7. So we get our rook as far away as possible. We keep the enemy king cut off. And now our future plan is pin it and win it. That's the idea that we want. So they have to work against us now. So rook to e3. Smart idea. Good plan. Now we need to improve this situation because we would like to get e6 in future, but only when it suits us, when we've pushed f5 and we have a pin. But how do we go about this? How do we make that happen in this case? Now, there's a few ways to do it. Capablanca takes a very interesting one and a very simple one, which is, look, if I play king to f2, the opponent's rook will move to e4, and I have a bit of a problem. So he simply plays rook b4, taking that away. Very instructive. So the opponent can't find a good defense. The king here is going to come across. So he decides to play rook c3. King f2 anyway. And Capablanca in this moment has gifted a draw to his opponent. But this is not an easy draw. Not at all. I want you to think carefully here and put it in the comments below. Let's see who can find this draw. And the principle really is to try and force this pawn structure. That's the one I want you to go with, which Capablanca missed. If black can force this pawn structure with such limited material, that from here is their best drawing chance. So this is a tough one for the more advanced players, where after king f2, he has messed up. What he should have done is kept his position more active and continued on his plan of rook to b7, and we can continue with this winning mechanism to push the opponent around. So here, king f2, the rook slips away to a3, missing his little window of chance, rook to b7. So now there's a problem. We're pinning it to win it. We're going to go forward. Now let's unpack. The opponent played their king to g8. Had they played their king up to g6, what are you going to do to win this? And this is the challenge for black. They're stuck now defending very passively. What are we going to do? Yes, we're going to push check. And the point is, if the king goes back, thank you very much. Now we have 2 extra pawns, 2 connected pass pawns. That's a simple win. No issue there. And again, if the king runs up, we play rook takes here. It does not matter that they're going to be able to capture this pawn because we have 2 connected runaway pass pawns that their king cannot stop. So suddenly, the black king is forced more passive onto the back rank. Very instructive. But how do we win? How do we continue here? I mean, we've forced him backward to be more passive, but what is our plan? And here Capablanca again turns to that plan of turning the enemy king into a target. And we've just seen a nice little tip here. If we could drive their king up away, we have ourselves a very nice win. So he goes for rook b8 check. By all means, if we look carefully, a move like pawn f5 is still very possible. But the problem is the enemy king can start walking across the board and getting active. Why we want this pawn structure as it is we want the ability for our king to move up and get into this position as well. So this is why he goes rook check, king g7. Now f5 is very different. It carries a threat of a forced win. Let's unpack. Because now the threat is, of course, pushing check. And then when we push check, if the king runs up, thank you very much, we're now going to be able to deliver this wonderful little tactic. And this is all part of the tactical team. So let's say black plays a very poor move. Let's unpack this, check so that you can see and clarify. Rook check. The king goes here, rook check, and this is very lost. But you might ask, but wait, he doesn't have to go up to g6. He can go to h7. How do we win it here? What's our win? Capablanca's shown this before. The theme of a pawn breakthrough. This is part of it is. Plan number 1, attack your opponent's weak pawns. Plan number 2, use your pass pawns. So, hey, let's make one. e6. Oops, the pawn is going to go through and become a queen. So this is Capablanca's plan, and this is what black should have been avoiding earlier. It's such a difficult position to defend. He delivers check, king up here. He delivers check, king to e4. He delivers check. Oh, what are we going to do? If we go back to f3, he's just going to keep us cut off in this case. I mean, he's just going to keep checking. What are we supposed to do in this case? Now, Capablanca pursues activity. By all means, we could play back, since if he plays check, we can go and hide the king over here with that activity. Suddenly with check, we go hiding around on h4, and we still have a win. Things are going very well in this position, and we will be successful. But we've got to be a bit careful, because we don't want to walk into that little checkmate trick that we saw earlier. So Capablanca says, no. He wants his king to be active. King to d5. And then his opponent refuses the gift. Capablanca offers him a free pawn, and he does not take it. Why? What do you think is Capablanca's win here? Let's see who's smart. Put this one in the notes. There is only one way to win this one. Put in the analysis, and it's very, very instructive to look and learn this. By the way, my recommendation is to take this in-game position that we have here and go play this against a very strong engine. So you can practice converting in different ways, because you're going to see the engine's going to try so many different themes in this case. So with this one, he turns down the pawn. Very instructive. Rook a5 check. Just as a reminder, those receiving the email notes, all the analysis is included in this so that you get to find out exactly what the setups are and what is the approach. So king to d6, look how the white king gets active. But hold on. Remember what I said to you right in the beginning. The only weakness that black had was this f pawn. And I'm sure when we started the video, you thought I was completely out of my mind when I said to you the white king needs to get to e8 and the rook attack f7. And how incredible. This is Capablanca's journey. He's now setting this up to hunt down this f7 pawn, which was meant to be the sole weakness in the opponent's position. And now he's going to go get that pawn. So now suddenly rook check, the king runs up to c7. Why to c7? Well, in this case, Capablanca has his own choices. I would prefer a little bit different in this position and run in with the king a bit to a different square. But let's unpack. If the checks continued, now Capablanca has rook b7, rook to a6, and then we see this plan, king to d7. As I mentioned to you before, part of this plan is king here, and we're going to go win that pawn. If the opponent decides to move their rook up, we can push e6. Thank you very much. We will now have a new pawn that's going to go run through and promote. What a spectacular win. Again, please play this against an engine. There are many wins, and it's very instructive once we see the active white king joining in from Capablanca, the success we can find. So they played king h7 trying to hold. The king goes to d7. That is our plan. Check. Now Capablanca decides he's going to play his king up here. Again, I like the plan. King e8, rook d8, rook d7, but king d6, king g7. What do we do? How do we win this position? We need to target f7. And right now, black is doing a great job of doubly defending it with a king and with a rook. So we need to remove that defense. That is our plan here. And there's a few ways to do it. Capablanca settles on the very simple rook to d8. Why? Because now the threat is rook d7 and e6, and we have victory. So the rook goes to a5. What else is he supposed to do? He doesn't have many choices. The whole idea of this move is to fight against rook d7, but I don't think much changes. So here, rook d7 and the king can invade, Obviously, it's built against king e7 as well, and that's the only thing we shouldn't do. But Capablanca follows through in a very nice plan. Check. King to h7. Huh? How are we winning this position? Because now, if we go rook d7, then their king can get active. Well, Kappa's got this all up in his sleeve. Rook f8. Now, it shouldn't take long because Capablanca has got complete control of the position. Rook a7, and we see a little bit of maneuvering. King to c6, and wow, zugzwang. The rook moves, we take the pawn with check. So therefore, the king has to go to g6, and we've seen this pattern before. Rook g8 check, king h7, rook g7 check, king to h6, and watch this space. How do we win this one? Again, many wins, but Capablanca chooses the very pretty one, using the fact that we have a zugzwang opportunity. So we play king b6, rook to d7, and now simply king to c5, rook c7 check. Notice, please put in the notes below the comments, why is e6 a mistake? Because e6 looks awesome. I pin the rook, they can't take, I'm going to win this pawn. Put it in the comments below. Let's be honest now, who wanted to play e6 in this position? So king to c5, the opponent plays check, king d7, rook a7, and suddenly now e6 works. What? But just rook check? King e7, rook takes check. We've just lost our, what is going on here? King takes f7, and now suddenly we see Capablanca's plan. Rook e4, and once again we have a question. How do we win? And this is the challenge of rook and pawn in games, where we see such an important theme being built around the activity of pieces. Black's king is a target. We would like to turn that into a nice checkmating opportunity. The question is how. So let's see who can find this wonderful plan. There's technically only one idea that wins this position. That's why some of the earlier decisions by Capablanca he's really great with, but I think he's put us under a bit of pressure now. So the one winning idea. G5. What a move. What? He gives up a pawn? And this is what I want you to see with rook and pawn in games, the challenge, what makes them so difficult. So often why they end in draws. It's all about activity. It's not material. It's what your pieces do for you. That is so very important. And most importantly, this theme, turning Black's king into a target. Absolutely wonderful. So pawn takes g5, king to g6, and he resigns. He pushed g5. Why? Because now his king has the ultimate shelter. And it's a very simple victory in this case. We are going to move our rook out of the way and then set up a checkmate. So, for example, let's say the opponent moves his rook away onto this side of the board, rook a4. We would deliver check, king here, and then easy enough, check, and we deliver mate. If he tried to put his rook behind the pass pawn, we then have a very simple decision as well, where we move the rook across and we have a mating net where the opponent has to sacrifice. What a wonderful win in this case. Now look, it's a magnificent ending that we demonstrate about pressure and Capablanca continually keeping the pressure up. It's a long endgame, but I think it offers so much instruction on strategy and ideas. And notice in the beginning, go back, review again in the notes, we identified immediately that f7 pawn view. That was the weakness. But we couldn't get to it for now. We had to work, we had to maneuver, which is absolutely crucial. Then there was also, if we get an understanding overall, some crucial themes that Capablanca understood that his opponent did not, about the setup that Black should have had. But guess what? The story will also be true for you. Now that you've gone through this, now that you hopefully go through the other endgame, in game 15, where you would get an understanding of how do you handle these rook and pawn in games, and what is more important, material or activity. So please do join me in the next game, game 52. By the way, game 52, as it turns out, I will highlight, is a wonderful game of Capablanca playing against the women's world best player. at the time, Virumenchek, a brilliant demonstration of how to convert an endgame, minor piece endgame, up a pawn. So do join me in the next one, and we will continue on our wonderful exploration on these endgames.